now brings me to the real pleasure of introducing someone to you who has had an enormous influence on me, and I'm sure many of you. I've been working in the field of autism for many, many years now. And it was really when Dr. Grandin wrote her first book, Emergence Labeled Autistic, that we really started to get a proper understanding about the way that people with autism were, as professionals, the way that people with autism were experiencing the world around them. And until that point, very often behaviours were seen as bad behaviour, naughty behaviours. And it was really once Temple started to express to us that wasn't the case, that it may be because of sensory issues, it may be because of processing difficulties. It really changed our way of looking at autism. So for me tonight I have a real debt of gratitude to Dr. Grandin for making that first change in the way that we started to be able to understand people with autism and hopefully support them far better. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Temple Grandin. Not only has she enabled us to understand people with autism so much better, but she also has a real prestigious career in her own right as Professor of Animal Handling at Colorado University. We're going to have about an hour of Temple speaking, then we've got a short interval between 7:45 and 8 o'clock. I'll ask you to get back into your seats for 8 o'clock, because we then got a session for question time. So I hope you all really enjoy this evening, and I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Temple Grandin.
Oh, you got a slide clicker, good. Good. No. Okay, we got a slide clicker. That was really good, because I didn't really want to walk back there to work the slides. Okay, I think I'll just talk a little bit about myself, first of all. I was born in 1947, and when I was a real little kid, I definitely had no speech, and I was very lucky to get into really good early intervention by age 2.5. I had a lot of speech therapy. In fact, it was 2 teachers that just ran a speech therapy clinic out of the basement of their house. And what they did was, like applied behavior analysis type of stuff, except it wasn't called ABA in those days. And then my mother hired a nanny who spent all day just playing turn-taking games with me and my sister. You got to teach these kids how to take turns. I hope you're able to see this screen, because it doesn't look very good to me. Can you see it okay? Okay, good. You gotta teach these kids how to take turns. And in the 50s, things that were fun to do, you had to do with somebody else. So we did lots of board games. I had a table hockey set. That's something you have to play with other kids. And the other thing is, the research is very clear. These little kids need about 20 or 30 hours a week of one-to-one teaching. You can't just let them sit there rocking and tuning out. Now, the thing is, you got to kind of push these kids just past the comfort zone, because if you don't stretch them, they're not going to develop. And that applies to little kids, and that applies to older, Asperger's. You got to stretch. When I was 15, I had an opportunity to go visit my aunt's ranch, and I was afraid to go because I was having all kinds of panic attacks and stuff like that. Well, basically, my mother gave me a choice. I could go all summer, or I could go for 1 week. Well, I got out there and I loved it. Now, if I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch, I would have never have gotten involved in the cattle industry. You see, you've got to stretch them. But remember, no surprises. Instant surprises, that causes panic and fear. But if you don't stretch them, nothing's going to advance. I'm seeing too many that aren't learning basic skills, shopping, cooking, how to talk to store staff, just the basic stuff. Now, you can get sensory problems along with many different labels. Now, the thing is, these labels are not precise. They're behavioral profiles. And you mainly have to get labels to get services. And one of the things that really concerns me is I'm seeing too many smart Aspergers and it going nowhere. In fact, in the US, they're going to change the diagnosis and get rid of Asperger's. And one of the reasons why they're doing that is funding. And they're going to change it to social communication disorder and then call that not autism. But that's a bunch of rubbish because social communication problems are autism. But the problem that you have with the autism spectrum is there's no black and white dividing line between geek, nerd, Steve Jobs, Einstein, Silicon Valley, computer genius. Then as you move down the spectrum, you've got people that are more severe. And when you have a spectrum that big, a lot of teachers know how to work with the more severe kids, but they don't know what to do with the smart, geeky kid. And I'm seeing too many smart, geeky kids going absolutely nowhere. They're graduating from college, they've never had any work skills, they're not getting employed. Now, unfortunately, they ran out of the books, Different Not Less, but you can always order them from Amazon.com in the US. They definitely have got them. And in Different Not Less, it profiles 14 older people with high-functioning autism, Asperger, ADHD, that got diagnosed as an older adult. And the reason why they got diagnosed is their marriages were terrible. But guess what? They all had jobs, and they kept their jobs, ranging from jobs like a veterinarian here in the UK to somebody that works in a store or somebody that works as a tour guide, but they've been employed all their life. Where are all the old people with Asperger's, people my age? They're all employed. And one of the reasons why they're all employed is those social rules were pounded in the 50s. All kids in the 50s just had to learn how to say please and thank you. And when I was a young child, I was maybe 6 years old, Mother would have dinner parties. And I had to put on my little Sunday school dress and serve hors d'oeuvres to all the guests and talk to them. It was really, really good training. One of the things that's really not understood, and it's now people are starting to recognize the sensory problems with sound sensitivity. You know, one disorder we should be diagnosing is sensory processing problems. Some kids have problems with sound sensitivity. And they got so much problem with sound sensitivity that they can't tolerate being in the kind of places to be social, like a football stadium or it would be soccer over here or rugby. I just was looking at that at the hotel, or a noisy restaurant or someplace like that. Now, sometimes you can help kids get over the sound sensitivity if they control it. Don't just shove them into it. But let's say we go into the big supermarket and it's really busy and really noisy, and let the child determine, well, how much Tesco are we going to, Sainsbury's, that we're going to tolerate today? And then let him give a signal to come out. And they're going to tolerate it better when they're not tired. When they're tired, it gets worse. I was terrified of balloons popping when I was a child. I hated balloons at parties. And one of the ways to get me over that would be, okay, I blow up a balloon this big and I pop it. Then I blow one up this big and I gradually make them louder. You see, that would help when the child initiates it. It's not going to work for everybody, but for some, that will work. Now, when I was very young, fortunately, the very first doctor I went to when I was 2.5 was a neurologist named Bronson Crothers. And, she doesn't, in the 50s, kids severe like me usually were just put away in institutions. And the Asperger's got enough social skills pounded in, so they ended up in the workplace and managed to stay in the workplace. So she did an EEG, found out I did not have epilepsy. She found out I wasn't deaf. Now, auditory threshold, the ability to hear a faint sound, and auditory detail are two different things. Auditory detail is the ability to hear the hard consonant sounds. You need to slow down, enunciate those consonants. You got to slow down so the child can hear it. Because when I was young and the grown-ups were yakking really fast, I thought grown-ups had grown-up language. I used to imitate grown-up language. That's grown-up language. Couldn't understand it. So slow down. I had problems with language output. I couldn't get my language out. Other kids are echolalic, and they're singing all these TV commercials and these videos, all the lyrics and all the things that they're saying, but they don't know what it means. You got to teach them what it means. And one way to do that, if he says juice, then give him the juice. If he's singing the juice commercial. Or I was just at another autism meeting, and they were telling me about how the child likes car insurance commercials. Well, maybe when that comes on, we'll give him a toy car. He's probably going to start calling all cars now car insurance. But he's got to start learning that words have meaning. You see, language output's working, but the meaning circuits aren't hooked up. Okay, one of the big problems in many, many situations where a brain has a problem is attention shifting slowness. If some circuits didn't grow, it takes much longer to shift back and forth between two things. One of the reasons why I don't want any photography during my talk is if a flash goes off, it distracts me, and it takes me much longer to get back to my train of thought. Now, afterwards, you can take all the pictures you want. I'm fine with that. Attention shifting slowness, you got to really, really think about that. Some of these kids, you got to give them time to shift gears. You got to give them time to respond. Now, this really illustrates attention shifting slowness. This is some work that Ami Klin did, and he showed that autistic people don't look at the eyes. Well, I didn't even know that people had secret eye signals until I read about them in a book when I was 50 years old. And that was Simon Baron-Cohen's book, Mind Blindness. But the other thing, and it's not in the journal article, is look at how many times the normal person looked back and forth. And the autistic only looked back once. Look at the attention shifting problem you got here. And so you might have somebody on the lower end of the spectrum, and you've got to give them time to get the channel open. Someone who's maybe got some receptive language problems. You might say, Tommy, I want you to hang up your coat. Well, maybe all he heard was coat. He doesn't know what to do with it. So now you're going to say, Tommy, I need to ask you to do something. Okay, now I got the channel open. Hang up your coat. You see, the first part of that sentence gets clipped because of the attention shifting slowness. Now, another problem that you can get is pixelation of the visual image. And I want to emphasize, sensory problems are extremely variable. I had sound sensitivity and I had touch sensitivity. My visual system works just fine. But for some people, some dyslexics can have this problem, some people labeled learning problems can have this problem, is the image breaks up. I'm sure you all have seen when it's raining really hard and the wind's blowing and the satellite dish is messing up, you get that pixelation of the image. Well, a similar thing can happen in the visual system. It happens back here. There's nothing wrong with the eyes. It's back here where the graphic files are put together because you have shape, color, motion, and texture circuits. They're located back here. And when things aren't working right with that, you can get all kinds of problems with seeing, even though the eyes are okay. I'm finding that 1 in 50 students have this problem. I find them in my class. These students absolutely cannot draw. Now, what are some signs that maybe the visual system's not working right? They tend to look out the corner of their eye. They often are terrified of escalators. And the big one is they hate fluorescent lights because they can see the 50-cycle flicker, flicking on and off like a strobe light. Now you have difficulty catching a ball. And there's some very simple things you can do for this. Now you see how the print looks all kind of jiggly on the page? When these kids go to read, the print's jiggling on the page. But I want to emphasize, not everybody with autism has this problem. Maybe only 10% really bad. See, the problem we've got, autism is an umbrella diagnosis. So when you look at the sensory problems, they vary from minor nuisances to totally debilitating. And some of the very, very severe people with autism, hearing is messing up like a bad mobile phone, fading in and out. The visual system's pixelating. And the only sense that actually works is smell and touch. That's why they're touching and smelling everything, because those sensory systems actually work when seeing is all messed up. Okay, here are some simple things you can try. Maybe put an incandescent light or an LED light next to their desk. Get their desk over by the window. Maybe turn off the fluorescent lights. And then make sure on the computers, using either a tablet or a laptop, they're the only screens that I can guarantee don't flicker. Now, there's new screen technologies coming all the time, but right now, what we have, tablets and laptops. That's what you want to use. My dyslexic student would have failed in her PhD if she hadn't had a laptop. This was back when we had the TV-type computers. Also, try printing the homework on pastel paper, maybe tan, maybe gray, maybe light blue, all the different pastel papers. And maybe one person will like light blue, and the right print will stop jiggling. Another one, gray. You might want to try the Irwin-colored lenses. Now, that can get a little bit expensive. So just go down to the sunglass store, especially one that likes to sell the 60s-style hippies, and they might have some light pink ones, some light lavender ones, some very pale ones, rose-colored glasses. I've sent a lot of students out sunglass shopping, and they found things in the sunglass shop. You've got to find real pale ones, because you're going to have to read with these, so they've got to be really pale. And you find the color where the print stops jiggling. Now, how does this work? Nobody knows how it works. Scientists do not know how these circuits back here work. They know where they are, because when people have strokes, it does very strange things to the visual system. They know where they're located, but they don't know how they work. It'd be sort of like if you took a computer and a bunch of flash drives and you sent them back 100 years in a time machine. Would anybody know how a movie is stored on a flash drive? I don't think so. I don't think they'd have the foggiest notion how that works. Well, that's where we are with the visual cortex. We don't know how it works. Okay, very severe sensory problems. One of the problems that the person has is they can't filter out background noise. I have problems hearing when there's background noise. Somebody that's more severe, they'll go into shutdown because all of the stimulation, maybe they're in a restaurant and the coffee maker's making a noise and the dishes are clattering and the door's opening and shutting and people are walking by. And when they're fresh and not tired, maybe they can screen it out. But then there's a point where it just all cascades in and they go into shutdown. Sometimes they're mono-channel. They've either got to look at something or they've got to hear something. They can't do both at once. Or some people are going to need frequent breaks, where they're going to have to have a little break, do a little stimming, calm down, and then you bring them back to doing their work. Now, some places we don't allow stimming at the table at dinner time, but when they're trying to learn how to do educational things, with very severe sensory problems, they got to take a little break, stim, then come back, do a little bit more work. Now, if you want to really understand sensory, there's some great books to read. These two books up here, and you're going to have to probably buy them on the US, Amazon.com. And How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move is one of them, and the other one is Carly's Voice. And both of these people are adults that are nonverbal. They look extremely low functioning, but they're typing independently. Nobody's holding onto the wrist here. They're typing independently, and they describe total sensory jumbling. And really, if you're working on the more severe end of the spectrum, I think these books are required reading. Another good one that you can get from Jessica Kingsley here is Donna Williams' Autism and Inside Out Approach. It's called Autism and Inside Out Approach. It's kind of an old book, but I think it's one of the best books that Donna Williams has written. I also have some sensory information about this in the Way I See It book. The Way I See It, probably have to get that off of US Amazon. Scientists have learned a lot about the brain. Scientists have done 10 zillion papers on the social stuff. The mirror neurons are mixed up. Face recognition's terrible. My face recognition is absolutely horrible. They need to be doing a lot more research on sensory, because these sensory things make it very difficult to do normal stuff. And there's a lot that's been learned. If you want to look at scientific research, you need to go on Google Scholar. How many people here know how to do Google Scholar? All right, you're going to learn. Go home to Google, type the word scholar in the search box. Click on the link that says scholar. Another really good database is PubMed. That's our National Library of Medicine. PubMed. Just type that into Google, PubMed. Don't worry about the address box. Just type it in the search box, PubMed, PubMed, and you can search summaries of scientific papers for free. Now, where you really have got the problems is in the inter-office communication between different parts of the brain. That's where we've really got problems in autism. In a head injury, you have problems because you ripped circuits. But in a developmental disorder, you have problems because the circuits didn't grow. You see, when you hear a word, you see a word, speak a word, you think about a word, different parts of the brain are going to turn on. Well, half of your brain is what's called white matter. These are the interconnector circuits that connect the different parts of the brain together. This is where a lot of problems are. And there's a tendency in autism to have more circuits in the back, and a lot of circuits up here in the frontal cortex sort of just don't get built. Well, this is sort of a route map of the main motorways in the brain that connect up different parts of the brain. And I'm going to have to use a map of the United States sort of as an analogy. On the East Coast, where you've got Washington, D.C. and New York, that's the frontal cortex. Well, a bunch of motorways don't get built there. Where Chicago would be, that's the amygdala. That's the fear center, the emotion center. I found out that mine's 3 times bigger. And that's why I had so many panic attacks. And those are controlled now with a low dose of antidepressant medication. Us visual thinkers, I'll be talking a little bit later about visual thinking, but us visual thinkers, we got a lot of problems with panic attacks and anxiety. Now, a little dose of Prozac can really stop that, but it's got to be a little tiny dose, because a big mistake that's made is giving way too much. And then you get agitation and insomnia. And in my The Way I See It book, I've got a whole chapter on that. And in Thinking in Pictures, I have a chapter on it called Believer in Biochemistry. And while we're on the subject of drugs, there's way too many drugs, at least in America, given out to little kids like candy. It's disgusting. I don't think that problem is as bad here. But there, for certain individuals, a little bit of Prozac can stop the anxiety. Now, the West Coast, that's where Silicon Valley's at. That's where Steve Jobs lives and all his friends out there. All his friends that are also Asperger. You see, one Asperger goes to Silicon Valley and starts a big computer company. His face has been all over our business magazines. And then you have another one that ends up on the Social Security. I'm not sure what you call it here. And another one like does artwork, might be a famous artist. You see, I work in a technical field. The meat plants that I work with would fall down if you didn't have people on the spectrum to keep them running. You know, skilled trades. That'd be a great place. And I was really happy. I was just talking to you over here, and you told me about an electrician company that's all run by people with Asperger's. That's an excellent skilled trade, because even if you don't build anything new, people still have to maintain the wiring in their houses. Okay, that's my head. Okay, what you see inside there, that's the white matter connector circuits. The gray matter, there's kind of a space in there between the skull and the white matter. Well, that's not filled with water, that's filled with the gray matter. That's all the wrinkly part. You see, that's the part you think with. But this is all just connector circuits. It's half the brain. And this has been done on a new scanner we have in the States. And we have to thank our Department of Defense for paying for this scanner, because it was originally developed for head injuries for veterans. And let me tell you, head injuries, it's not a pretty sight. Concussions, you don't want to go there, because these things just get ripped in half. But it can scan every little tiny white matter fiber, and they can actually do circuit dissections. And it was very, very interesting looking in my brain at this. This is all put together by Walter Snyder. Okay, there's the connectome itself. Like the NIH calls this the connectome, part of the brain that connects everything else together. Okay, now there's a normal language output circuit. That's a normal one. Now I'm going to show you mine. Well, you see these circuits grow from the back to the front. Well, and why has it got all those bushes coming off like that? Because it had trouble growing to the front. So it just made off-ramps into all kinds of weird places. But the end result is, and this is, okay, things that I see, what I say, you see how much more bandwidth the normal's got on the end, on the output end, than mine's got? The normal's got more fibers in the right place for language output. And I had problems with getting my speech out. It's like a stutter. It's like, I'd say, bah, for ball, bah. You see, echolalia and language output, they're totally different brain circuits. I can't wait until the future where they get this. It's not going to be any close to any hospital very soon, unfortunately. Okay, now over there on the right-hand side, that is my hear a sound, and then what do I say? I got this little tiny little auditory output circuit. Well, and I had to do a lot of teaching, you know, to get that to work. Now, there's evidence that language covers up other things like visual thinking and mathematics, because there's a certain type of frontal lobe dementia, wrecks your language part, and then art ability comes out. Now, this is a picture that a young child gave to me that they did at age 9. You know, when kids get around your second, third grade, around in that age, if they're going to have a special skill, that's when it usually shows up. We've got to build on the area of strength. My ability in art was always encouraged. And I was always encouraged to draw lots of different things. Otherwise, it would have just been nonstop horse heads and nothing else. Well, when I painted a beautiful picture of a beach, Mother put it in a professional frame. Yes, I knew the difference between a professional frame with glass and a refrigerated door. And I was very proud that my picture went up on my mother's bedroom wall as a professionally framed picture. But she didn't just put any old stuff in a frame. She only put the good stuff in it. And there's a picture that a young man sent to me to show how he has movies in his head. I just want to mention one other thing, fixations. Kids get fixated on trains. Trains is a real big one. That'll be a big one around here because you got lots of trains. Okay, let's read about trains. Let's do math with trains. Let's read about the history of the railroad. Take that fixation on the trains and build on that to motivate schoolwork. Fixations are great motivators. Get an associative link back into those fixations. Now, I think in photorealistic pictures. And there's one of the cattle handling facilities I designed for one of our big meatpacking plants. And half the cattle in the US and Canada and in Australia go in equipment I designed, a thing called a center track restrainer system. I think that's doing pretty good for somebody that thought you'd have to go to an institution. And here is the cattle handling facility that they recreated for the HBO movie, Temple Grandin. Now, if you want to get the movie, I'll tell you how to get it. You can go to Amazon.com in the US. Now, when you get the CD from the US, it will not play on a DVD player here, but it will play on a computer if you set the computer for region 1. And if you don't know how to do that, go down to your nice, friendly neighborhood computer store, and somebody on the spectrum will show you how to do it. There also are some either Spanish or Portuguese versions that are available here in Europe. If you can speak Portuguese or Spanish, just search for them. The name of the movie is Temple Grandin. And I've heard that Netflix has just come into here. I don't know if it will be available on it because they have all kinds of weird contract stuff between the different countries, but it is available from Amazon.com and is available in Europe and some other languages. And then in the movie, there's you can choose your language. So even if the cover's in Portuguese, don't worry. The disc will play on a DVD player here. Okay, when you're a weird geek, people didn't want to talk to me when I was in my early 20s. So how did I get employment? How did I get jobs? I'd show them my drawings. I remember going to an ag engineering meeting when I was in my early 20s. They thought it was so weird they didn't want to talk to me. I whip out one of these drawings, then I got respect. I learned how to sell my work rather than myself. That's how I got every freelance job. See, and then I worked freelance, one little job at a time. We got to start kind of looking for a lot of these freelance things, freelance programming, freelance web design, graphic arts, freelance electrician work, a lot of different things. And there's another one of my drawings. And there were people that helped me. People respect talent. And we've got to be working on developing these things. We've got to get more of a mindset. When this kid is graduates from primary school, we got to say, well, what can we train him to do? We got to start teaching work skills. I'm seeing too many kids graduating from college with Asperger's. They don't know how to drive, they don't know how to buy clothes, they don't know how to have a bank account. They haven't been taught anything. Nothing's been done, they've had no work experience. When I was 13 years old, my mother had me working for seamstress 2 afternoons a week and I hand-sewed dresses. When I was in college, she set up internships for me. One summer I worked in a research lab and I had to rent a house and then live with another person. That taught really important skills. Now, how do you form a concept when you have I have all these pictures floating around my mind, very specific pictures? I form a concept by sorting the pictures into boxes. That's bottom-up thinking, not top-down. Everything is learned by specific example. And this young man drew boxes in his head, and he put the dogs in one box and the cats in another box. So how about something more abstract? How about something like, what is good? What is saintly? Okay, Mother Teresa would be saintly. Being good would be getting good marks in school. And I'd have several examples for the different levels of goodness. And just, doing things right, like household chores, well, that's just kind of expected. Okay, now I realized my thinking was different when I asked people about church steeples. I said, think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? And I was shocked to find out that most people saw this vague, generalized thing. I only see specific ones. My concept of what a church steeple is based on specific examples. Okay, they kind of come up like Google for images. I can tell you, I love search engines. They work exactly how my mind works. And they come up like this. Here's a childhood church. Here's one in Fort Collins where I live. Here's famous ones in the U.S. Another famous one in the U.S. famous ones in Europe. You can make them in categories. They can be chapels, they can be cathedrals, you see, and I can take pictures and put them in different categories. And I'm going to show you some more cool brain scans. And on the right-hand side's mine, and you see a great big huge cable going back all the way to the back of the brain. That's where the graphics files are located. They found, my graphics card, and I got a really big graphics card. The auditory circuits, they were really bad. And then you take another slice right about here, and you see that big giant bush that's coming out there on my right-hand side. That's where the gray matter joins the white matter. And those are probably shunt circuits that all the teaching made grow, because they're very strange circuits that show up on the other scan, and they're so strange that don't really want to show them because we don't really understand them. But there's something, the plasticity's probably going on there. There is some evidence that these big long fibers that go across the brain, that you can widen the motorways, but you can't probably grow new ones. If they're not there at all, probably going to be in a bunch of trouble. And that red fiber goes all the way back, way deep into the primary visual cortex. Okay, this is another scan where you can see that the fluid-filled ventricles are asymmetrical. And on the left-hand side there, that's gone into the parietal area, really messed up math, trashed working memory. I have no ability to remember sequence. I got to write things down, or I just don't remember sequence. Got to read stuff. All right, this is probably one of the most important slides I've got. When you get on the higher end of the spectrum, there's sort of 3 different kinds of minds. You can also have mixtures of minds. I'm a photorealistic visual thinker. Everything I think about's in pictures. Even abstract things I have to think about in pictures. Because if I don't have pictures, I don't have any thought. Now, one of the ways I learned to understand abstract things more is I read a lot of things. I went out and I've been to a lot of different places, so I got lots of information I've put into the database. Because my mind works like a search engine. It's like an internet inside here, but you got to fill up the internet with information. We got to get these kids doing stuff. Because even on social things, telling the boss off, probably not a good idea. So you learn not to do that in the future. Another thing, I didn't pick up subtle cues. I almost lost my job at the Arizona Farm and Ranchman magazine because I didn't realize the new boss we had didn't like me. And the nice lady in the graphic design department said, we got to put together a portfolio of all your articles. So I made this scrapbook with all my articles and showed that to Jim, and he gave me a raise. I saved my job by showing my work. Now, another kind of mind is the pattern thinker. This is more the mathematical mind. These kids often have trouble with reading. I absolutely couldn't do algebra. You know what? Let's skip algebra, go right to geometry and trig. And another kind is the verbal guy. This is the guy that loves history, just absolutely loves history, all kinds of word things. They do not draw. And, we got to build the strength, and we got to start thinking about what are they going to do when they grow up. And then people that have a lot of visual problems, they're going to be an auditory thinker. They're going to learn best through their ears. Okay, just to show you that there are 2 different ways to do the formula. There's the verbal way, and there is the graphic pattern way. This is just to give you a glimpse into the mind of the pattern thinker. This is not my mind. That praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No cuts, no tape. And what you see in the background, that's the folding pattern. That's not my mind. That's the mind of the physicist, the computer programmer, the engineer. And a lot of these guys are on the spectrum. I'm going to guess that half the people in our computer industry are on the spectrum. That's where they need to be. When I was a kid, the hands-on things saved me. I loved art, wood shop, making things, and too often in the schools they're taking too many of these hands-on things out, like cooking, sewing. Boy, I loved sewing when I was a kid. When I was in 3rd grade, I had this little hand cranker sewing machine. It was my favorite thing. Wonderful little sewing machine. It's called a Singer Sew Handy. You can probably buy one on eBay. But making things teaches practical problem solving. Making things also teaches you on how to do things that you can turn into careers. So how do I understand something abstract? I had to learn the Lord's Prayer, but I absolutely didn't know what it meant. And this is the power and the glory in the Lord's Prayer. You see you've got a rainbow, and at the base of the rainbow you have an electrical power tower. That is the power and the glory. Okay, this is another super important slide. All my thinking uses specific examples to make concepts. It's bottom up, not top down. You have got to think in the opposite way that you want to think. You got to learn everything through specific examples. You want to teach them not to run across the street, you better teach them in 5 or 6 different places. Otherwise, they won't get the concept. Concept of what a dog is based on seeing a whole lot of different dogs. They go in the dog file. The cats go in the cat file. And the thing I find when people are troubleshooting behavior problems, they ask these vague problems like, tell me the most important thing about autism. Well, if the kid's 3, I'm going to tell you 20 hours or more of one-to-one teaching. But once the kid gets older, there isn't any one thing. I got to know a little bit more about the child. There's a tendency to oversimplify. I got a behavior problem in the classroom. What do I do about it? Well, I don't know. Is it a 5-year-old throwing a tantrum? Is it someone who's 16 years old that's just bored stiff? And I want to just say, these little math geniuses, when they're in the 3rd or 4th grade, don't make them do baby math. Get the high school book in there and let them do the hard stuff. But they're going to need special ed and reading. Okay, play games with categories. This helps to teach flexibility of thinking. If I say to the autistic kid, pick out the red objects, they'll do that. But where they have trouble is, let's make new categories for these objects. Rectangular things, things you write with, things that contain plastic, things you wear. Sometimes an article, one of these objects can be in more than one category. You know, you might use, pens or something you write with, but they also contain plastic. That is more than one category. And this will help teach flexibility of thinking, playing games with categories. Okay, the autistic mind is into details. Like if I tell you to pick out the little letters, they'll pick out the little letters a lot faster than picking out the big letters. That's details. That helped me in my work with cattle because cattle are really into details. Like there's a spot of sunlight on a race, they won't go up that race. When I was in high school, the other students used to call me tape recorder. I was horribly teased in high school. Terrible. High school was the worst part of my life. I'm much more of a believer of mainstreaming the little young kids. And then when they get older, there's some that need to be taken out. I was one that had to be taken out. I got kicked out of a girls' school for fighting, and I went to a special high school. And I didn't do very much studying there, but boy, I did a lot of working. I took care of the horse barn, I shingled the barn roof, I repaired the barn. I may not have been doing very much studying, but boy, I learned a whole lot of things about working. So they call me tape recorder. Why did they call me tape recorder? Because I always use the same phrases. This is why you got to get them out, exposed to lots of different things. Because as you fill up the database, then my search engine's got more stuff to surf. And on this brain scanner, they found I have extra fibers that come out of here. Normally, these sideways fibers come out of the frontal cortex. Mine come out here. So they're in the, it makes my thing, that's probably explains the bottom-up thinking. The thing that's been interesting about the brain scan stuff is everything that showed up on the brain scan has shown up clinically. Now that doesn't mean it's all biological determinism. The brain scan, what's in the brain is probably half of it. And teaching and all of that is the other half, because there is plasticity in the brain. Now you're not going to make me an algebra specialist. I don't think that's going to happen. But I did learn to talk, even though my language circuit was messed up. Now if the language circuit was totally missing, probably wouldn't have learned to talk. But there's some that can't talk that can learn to type. They almost have like a locked-in syndrome. So you got to get them out, you got to get them doing things. Mother was always, she kind of knew just how hard to push, just how much to stretch. Just stretch a little bit past the comfort zone. You got to keep stretching. Teach number concept. You got to teach with a variety of different things. You got 2 water glasses, 2 paper clips, 2 people, 2 cars, 2 buildings, 2 pencils. The numbers apply to many different things. Teach subtraction with real things. Cooking is a great place to teach math because you've got to do measuring. The hands-on classes are great places to teach math concepts. And then fractions, cutting up fruit, cutting up a pie, cutting up pizza. That teaches the idea of fractions. Do it with real things. So math is not abstract. Okay, to teach words like up and down and on and in, you need to teach them with many different examples. You put the juice in the refrigerator. I get in the car. I went in the house. You know, I put a book in the bookcase. Use different examples like that. See, first thing on the echolalic kids, you got to teach the nouns. Then you got to teach the position words. Up, down, in, stop, go. And forget about teaching words like is and the. They'll learn those like a parrot. They already know them. Those words don't mean anything. If I say, the book is on the table, if I just say book on table, it means the same thing. They'll parrot the position words. Don't worry about teaching the position words. They don't mean anything. You got to teach words that mean stuff. Okay, this is another brain scan that was done with functional MRI. And they showed me pictures of people and pictures of a lot of stuff. And I was more interested in looking at the things than at the people. But you need some people interested in things, or all your bridges are going to fall down and none of your infrastructure is going to work. You wouldn't have a computer. Tesla, who invented the power plant, would be labeled autistic today. And I read an article yesterday about Alan Turing. He's a very important person in antique, you know, when computers first started. Real important. And so I noticed in the paper yesterday, in one of your papers, it mentioned Asperger's and Alan Turing. Okay, where do I get social interaction? Through shared interests. The only places where I was not teased was horseback riding, electronics lab, and model rocket club. You got to get kids into these other activities. There's a lot of farms around here. Farming activities, that's a great thing. We have a great youth agricultural program called 4-H and FFA. Those are great activities. Get into the school play, the school newspaper. Get involved with things with shared interests. You know, Boy Scouts, I guess you have Boy Scouts here, but I mean, those, you know, camping organizations. You know, get creative, because that's where the friends are going to be. There's too many kids getting addicted to video games. Well, maybe you could get them interested in programming the game, interested in doing artwork for the game. Now, I'm not programmer material. I'm one of the kids that could have gotten addicted to video games if they'd been around, and I'd still be addicted to video games. But some that are programmer material, you get someone to teach them some programming. And I have found that kids don't learn programming by osmosis. Somebody's got to actually get in there and get the books and get them to start teaching. Okay, when we have a behavior problem, is it biology or is it behavior? You know, I categorize things. See, my mind categorizes. I put things in categories. So I go, is it biology, where maybe I've got a sensory problem that's causing behavior? Or maybe it's the fear of a big sensory problem. Fire alarm went off last week, so now he sees the fire alarm and he's scared it's going to go off. Or there's a really bad mobile phone with a terrible ringtone. They're afraid it's going to go off, so they don't want to go in that room. Or a mic screeched, then they don't want to get near it. Just the fear of getting blasted. Or maybe it's a hidden, painful medical problem. All right, then I got the three main things that are the behavior reasons. Frustration because they can't communicate. Huge, huge frustration. How about getting out of doing stuff? How about getting attention? These are all reasons for throwing a temper tantrum. You got to figure out what's motivating the behavior. Now, there's some things you're going to need to accommodate. There may be some where you got to take them out before the fire alarm goes off. The kid that constantly has supermarket temper tantrums probably has very, very severe sensory problems. I've seen some where they can't tolerate the supermarket. There's one place where research needs to be done. It needs to be on sensory. I make that number one. How can you be social if you can't tolerate the place where people do social? I can't tolerate scratchy clothes. I was talking to a mom the other day that her child couldn't stand wearing the jumper. We call it a sweater at home, wool jumper that went with her school uniform. Well, then get a long-sleeved shirt then. I'm sure the uniforms also come with a long-sleeved shirt. That would be something you might need to accommodate. And then I had problems with if I'd been wearing shorts in the summer, then I didn't like the feeling of the pants. I didn't like the feeling of the change. And I'd go into wintertime, like freezing my legs off, and then finally it gets so cold I couldn't stand it, I'd wear the pants, and it took me about a week to get used to them. You know, try to find things where there's soft things against the skin, or you could line the sleeves of the jumper. Let's get a little creative here. You know, let's start thinking of creative things. Poor handwriting. You know, that's a reason why keyboards were invented. Two of the big problems here. Multitasking, I can't multitask. A lot of entry-level jobs require multitasking. Another thing is I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. Because all my working memory is like ruined. But for most high-level jobs, you don't need working memory. Write it down. Write down. Okay, you got to learn how to clean the ice cream machine at McDonald's. Well, then you write down the steps for cleaning the ice cream machine. And when I worked in a dairy, fortunately, they had written on the wall the steps for setup and dismantling and cleaning of the dairy equipment. If I hadn't had that cheat sheet, I would have been in trouble. Then make your own little cheat sheet where you just write down the sequence doing the job. Now, my 50s upbringing, I think, really helped me. Turn-taking, sitting at the table, the whole family together, and I had to sit there, and I had to learn table manners. If I reached across the table to grab some of the food, Mother didn't scream no. She said, ask your sister to pass it. Okay, when the child does something he shouldn't do, don't scream no. Give the instruction. If he touches the merchandise in the store too much, say you can only touch it if you're going to buy it. Give the instruction. You give the instruction, or he's going behind the counters at the store, say, well, only the clerks can go behind the counters in the store. Just give that instruction. Being on time, that was pounded in. I was expected to be on time. I had to go to church whether I wanted to or not. Sometimes you just got to do stuff the whole family does. Unfortunately, they didn't have electronic blasted out churches when I was a kid. That would have been a problem. Saying please and thank you. If I didn't say please or thank you, I was cued. You forgot to say, they were always on me. Teaching those basic manners things. And I think this lack of teaching manners in a structured way hurts those autistic kids a lot more than it hurts the normal kids. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the Aspergers today aren't getting employed. Then this brings up the whole thing about disclosure. You know what? I don't disclose to anybody. I don't tell them about the movie if they don't know about it. If I talk to somebody on a plane, I just tell them professor of animal science at Colorado State. Maybe it's a better thing to just tell an employer that you have problems with multitasking, or I need a quiet place to work, or I've got to get away from the fluorescent lights. Just disclose the one particular thing. Because I've seen some sad situations where people have been in stable employment and then disclosed, and they lost a job. No, it's not right, but that's the big bad world. Okay, being rude. Oh, that wasn't tolerated. And I remember one time my sister and I were giggling. My Aunt Bella was very fat. And we were going, Aunt Bella's bosoms bounce up and down like horse feed bags. And her mother said, Bella hears that, you're going to be grounded for a week. Now, if I had a temper tantrum, I lost TV for one night. That was the rule. Didn't matter what the reason was, a temper tantrum equaled one night with no TV. They didn't take it away for 2 weeks, just one night. And the other thing is I had absolutely consistent discipline between home and school. Mother and the teacher worked together as a team. There was no way I could manipulate the teacher against mother and vice versa. The rules were the same in both places. These kids are masters at seeing where they can get away with stuff. Being a slob. There's a scene in the HBO movie where they slam down the deodorant and say, you stink, use it. That happened. And at the time that happened, I was very angry at that boss. But today I thank that boss. And I thank him a whole lot. This is the things that, really helped me out. Teaching things, shaking hands. Well, I had to learn to shake hands at mother's dinner guests. My brother works for a bank, and when he was a young kid, he had to do that too. That wasn't just done with me, that was done with all the children. You know what he said when he grew up and he was working for a bank? He said some of his colleagues didn't know how to shake hands with a big CEO boss guy, and that those skills that my normal brother learned helped him in his job at a bank. Eye contact, ordering food in restaurants, shopping, just, things out in the community. You go into McDonald's, did you say thank you to the clerk? Just basic things like this. And it needs to be taught in real places out in the real community. Going on the buses, going on trains. Another thing that I think is hurting a lot of the kids on the spectrum today is kids don't do play groups a lot, at least they don't at home. Everything is so structured. We'd get 4 kids together and have to figure out how to build a treehouse, figure out how to do a game. You see, that requires some negotiation, and you don't always get to do it your way. Well, eccentric, England, I think England sort of got a history for being tolerant of eccentric people. I just want to emphasize Asperger's, autism, little quirky, it's all the same thing when you get on the mild end of the spectrum. When you look at the biology, there is no black and white divider line between geek and mild Asperger's. But you see, in the English language, I'm finding people just getting locked into these labels. You know, I think that's part of the problem, because one of the problems is when you got such a big spectrum, you got half the people on the spectrum where they're not going to be able to work. But then the other half is perfectly capable of working. It's okay for geeks to cry. When they shut down the space shuttle program, we had NASA space scientists crying on national television, crying and walking off camera on our #1 news show, 60 Minutes. See, what happened with me is after I had horseback riding taken away for 2 weeks for a gigantic fist fight in my new school's cafeteria, I switched from anger to crying. Teasing still hurt, but I just switched. That's why I have a career. And I'd go hide. I had places in these different meat plants where I'd go hide. Electrical room, one of my favorite places. Got a sign on the door to keep other people out. I'd go in the electric room. I would go underneath the stairs in the basement. I'd go on the cattle catwalk when I had my bad problems. That's why I still had a job. And I've had parents go, "Oh, my teenage boy cries." I go, "Good. Crybabies can work for NASA." I watched another NASA space scientist at a career fair. He was my age. The shuttle had just been canceled the week before, and he broke down and cried in front of 600 high school students. That was the saddest thing that you ever saw. Yeah, and he had a very successful career with NASA. Okay, this is a rule system I still live with. Remember, I put things in categories. Remember, it's bottom-up thinking. So when I was in high school, when I was in my teens, I put all of society's rules into 4 categories. And I still live with this today. You can't have a civilized society and have really bad things like people wrecking buildings and stealing stuff and killing people. That's really bad stuff. You never have to do that. Then you have your courtesy rules. They help people to get along. And then I'm going to have an illegal but not bad category where we kind of break some stupid school rules. Like we might take a 12-year-old boy out on an industrial site on a Sunday to show him some cool stuff to get him turned on. And we make darn sure he doesn't get hurt. But we're doing that because when we show him that cool stuff, then he's going to work to want to achieve that. If you don't show them cool stuff, they need to learn oil wells have joysticks too. They're not just on video games. And then you got the sins of the system. You know, like in one society, a drug offense, it's a death penalty. In Thailand, it's a death penalty for drug offenses. In other country, pot's legal. See, that's an example of a sin of the system. They're very variable. And in some societies, you have draconian penalties. Behavior at the airport since September 11th, boy, you better behave at the airport. That's all been moved into the sin of the system category. The sins of the system, you don't mess with these. You never break these rules because they get you in just too much trouble. Okay, let's say you have somebody who's nonverbal that can't talk. And he's been good, and now all of a sudden his behavior is horrible. Let's check out hidden painful medical problems. Acid reflux. You know, heartburn down here. #1, if you have a nonverbal and they're doing this, their stomach probably hurts. Try some over-the-counter acid reflux medicine. I don't know what's available here over the counter. We have a drug called Prevacid and Zantac and stuff like that. You can buy it over the counter for acid reflux. Hopefully you can buy those things over the counter here. Try some of that. And some other little tricks is don't lay down right after eating and get the head of the bed up. And maybe he's got a toothache. Maybe he's got constipation. Maybe he's got a urinary tract infection. Maybe he's got a yeast infection. You got to rule this stuff out. Those are simple tests. Just take a urine sample into the doctor and they can test that. That's very, very simple stuff. But unfortunately, we've had problems where they've got these kind of problems, and then they're giving them tons and tons and tons more doses of drugs, of psychiatric drugs, rather than fixing the medical problem. Okay, there's my squeezing machine. When I got into puberty, that's when the panic attacks started. Absolutely terrible, terrible panic attacks. And the pressure machine helped to calm me down. Deep pressure is calming for some people on the spectrum, but it doesn't work for everybody. You see, this is the problem on studying these things, is these sensory issues are very variable. One kid's going to respond really well to deep pressure, another one it's not going to work. And they found out that my fear center is bigger. but I want to emphasize not everybody on the autism spectrum has this. Tends to be us visual thinkers, us artists. We're the ones that tend to get this problem. The word thinkers, I think they tend to be calmer. And there's a rear view of the squeezing machine. And here's a therapist, an occupational therapist, doing some pressure right at the same time you're doing some speech therapy. You know how you can take your mobile phone outside and you can hear on it because the connection's better? When you do some of these sensory things, it can sort of open up the channels, like sort of stop the static on the channel. And you do some of your speech work, things like that, right when you're working on the, when you're doing the pressure. And here's a child in a little net swing. You're doing swinging, you've got pressure. Rhythm activities, balancing activities, that can sometimes help stimulate speech. How does it work? Well, nobody knows why it works, but there's some kids where this works. Another thing to try is singing. Music is a different circuit in the brain. So try singing the words rather than speaking them. Sometimes that works. Just try to, do music. There's a little boy with a weighted vest. Now, if you go on to PubMed, you're going to find a bunch of papers that say they don't work. But the problem is they don't work across the whole spectrum. But there's some kids where this works. Try sitting on a ball, balancing activities. The mistake that's made with these things is leaving it on too long. It's 20 minutes, then take it off for a while. Don't leave it on too long. And sometimes they help kids to stay on task. Okay, I think it's important to get these kids desensitized so they'll like hugging. Remember, deep pressure's calming. Tickle touches set off an alarming response. Deep pressure's calming. And you can gradually just desensitize that and get the kid to like being hugged. And I think it helps them get feelings of kindness. We gotta get teenagers working. Teenagers need to start working. 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, that's when they need to start mowing some lawns, walking some dogs, maybe tending somebody's garden. They got to start learning how to do work. When they're younger, they got to make their beds, do some cooking stuff. They got to learn how to do stuff. I had a great science teacher. When I was in high school, I didn't do very much studying until my science teacher got me studying for the goal of becoming a scientist. You got to take kids out and visit interesting workplaces. You got to show them interesting stuff to get them turned on. You got to show them stuff. There's more to the world than just video games. And there's some kids that could become video game designers, but there's a lot of others that are not going to become video game designers. We got to start, when we get on the high end of the spectrum, getting a lot more into how are we going to get them employed. How do you sell employers? You sell them by their work. Let's forget the interview process. Short circuit that. Get pictures, drawings, and mathematical things, and programming code they've done. Things that you can show off their work. You sell their work, you don't sell them. Now I talk about making a portfolio, and don't put too much junk in your portfolio. And you know what? You better have it on your phone. Because you never know when you're going to meet somebody, you can whip that phone out, show them the portfolio. And it needs to be on the phone itself. Don't rely on trying to get a connection. It needs to be on that phone. You can show the artwork. You could show some programming code. You could show origami that they've made. People respect talent. And this is one of the things that helped me get ahead. When they saw my drawings and they saw the good articles I wrote for the Fire and Ranchman magazine, I got respect for that. Okay, when I was in high school, not studying, I decided I would redo our ugly Skeeto house. And I did put tongue and groove siding on it with white trim. I had to do it with something that other people would want. You got to learn how to do stuff other people want. Okay, jobs for teenagers, walking dogs, paper routes. I think you still have some paper routes around here. Perfect thing. And in the Different Not Less book, they all had paper routes. Teachers are real disciplined. They were selling greeting cards. How about fixing computers for local businesses? Like the flower shop, the dry cleaner, the little corner store. How about making PowerPoint presentations for business people? How about selling artwork and crafts? How about working on a neighborhood newsletter or church website, and you got to maintain that website? It's a great job for a 13-year-old. And how about working in a farmer's market? There's all kinds of opportunities. People just aren't seeing them. You got to start getting creative. Now I'm beginning to find out why my parietal bushes really help me get creative. I tend to ramble around when I write because I associate, but I see connections. Okay, get them into things like robotics clubs, science clubs, school play, band, a geology club, a garden club. I know you're big on gardening here. That's a great activity. You can get 8-year-olds involved in that and get them involved in that stuff. And that's stuff that they can do with other people. They can talk about plants to other people. That's a great thing, because they can get friends through gardening. That's stuff you can start kids when they're 8 or 9 years old on that. Okay, it's another one of my drawings. I always like to show those off. And here's one of my cattle facilities that's been done in SketchUp. SketchUp is a free program you can get on the internet. There's all kinds of wonderful free stuff. There's SketchUp clubs. And you're learning 3D drafting, and you start making a portfolio of buildings and things that you've drawn with this. That's something that, people are going to, want your skills. Online, and look at, what do the local technical schools got? We call those community colleges at home. Online learning, there's all kinds of stuff. All right, here's some great websites. I'm going to put that up there. There's tons of stuff online for free programming. And there's a couple that are not up here. They keep getting new ones every day. There's Coursera, like a college course, and then RA. It's course, like a college course, and then the Sun God, Coursera. That's how I remember that. There's a whole bunch of these things. Free courses at Stanford. Just type that into Google, free courses at Stanford. When it comes to science and technology, there's wonderful stuff. Khan Academy, that's fabulous. There's all kinds of free stuff going from grade school, primary school, math lessons up through, really complicated stuff. There's wonderful stuff on the internet. It's sort of like you got the internet right there. It's right there in your computer, but you don't look. I'm just kind of appalled. It blows my mind. I have parents say to me, well, how do I find a college for my kid? I said, well, did you think to look online? Like you type into the search box college and the name of your, like it would be our state at home. Or you might type, the region of the UK. You don't have to, Google was made so you didn't have to know anything about computers to operate Google. The other thing you got to realize is you got to use all the different search terms. Let's just take cattle, for example. You got cows, calves, bulls, heifers, steers. You got to use all the different cattle words because the computer doesn't know the difference between a steer and a cow. So you've got to use all those words. Open Courseware Consortium, that's another good thing. Wolfram Mathematica, you love math, that's a fabulous, wonderful math site. And there's the Optical Illusion Room. I saw that in a movie, and then in an HBO movie, I built that. I actually built that. That was something I saw in science class. This is showing kids interesting stuff, get them interested in interesting things. There's the movie crew. I can tell you, there was Asperger's all over that movie crew. And they were not in the catering department. Okay, there's the plant where I started my career. And how did I get in? Through the back door. We got to start getting creative about finding back doors. You know a friend, you show them the guy's portfolio. Get it on your phone. Because you never know where the person's going to be that can open the door. And that's something I figured out really early on. And this is my Western shirt that's in the Cowgirl Hall of Fame. And it's a hand-embroidered shirt that I hand-embroidered. And I met the wife of their insurance agent. In the movie, they changed it to the plant manager's wife because the wife of the insurance agent is like too weird, but that's actually what it was. You never know who can open up the door. And you can find them maybe at the supermarket, the train station. You just never know where you're going to find them. And for technical fields, people have to wear those ID badges. Well, you need to be reading ID badges. And I'd go to conventions and go out card hunting and sell jobs at conventions. Okay, we're getting near the end of my talk. What about jobs for the visual thinkers? That's my kind. Industrial design, that's what I do. See, when you design a product like the iPad, the industrial designer made the interface. Steve Jobs wasn't a programmer. He was an industrial designer. He was an artist. And computers have beautiful fonts because Steve Jobs sat in on a calligraphy class after he dropped out of school. And the engineer, the pattern thinker's got to make the inside of the iPad work. You see, you've got to have both the industrial designer and the engineer working together on projects. And I think maybe they needed me at the Fukushima atomic power plant, because when I found out why those burned up, I just couldn't believe it. It's not too smart when you live next to the sea to put your emergency generator that runs your very important emergency cooling pump in the basement. Because what do you think happened to those big diesels when they got underwater? It's sort of like don't work. And you don't have to be a nuclear scientist to know that. Any farmer would tell you that. How about computer hardware, graphic arts, drafting, auto mechanics, diesel mechanics? We got a shortage of them. Fixing computers, handcrafts, AV technicians, set up stuff for concerts and conventions, photographers. A veterinary technician, I don't know if you have those here, it's a 2-year degree. It's like a veterinary nurse. It's getting very, very popular in the States. We got to just start getting creative on the whole job thing and getting out, because I'm seeing smart people on the spectrum graduating from college and they haven't learned one work skill their whole entire life. That's atrocious. Okay, then our pattern thinkers. They're your programmers, your physicists, your engineers, chemists, electronics, math teachers. These are your pattern thinkers, the ones that think in patterns. Then you got the word thinkers. This is the group where I'm finding is having the hardest time finding work because they're less likely to have a fancy portfolio to show off. I can show off art and drawings. The mathematicians can show off math stuff and programming stuff, things they've done mathematically. This group, some of them are good at writing. They might make good journalists. But one area they might be very good at is specialty retail. It could be electronics. It could be men's suits. It could be ladies' shoes. It could be jewelry. It could be a pet store. It could be a lot of different things because they would know everything about all the different products. And if with the right training for the social interaction in the store, like, no, you don't stalk customers, and you're going to have to teach them, well, look at how Jim works with a customer. Now just do it the way Jim does it. I know one guy that's Asperger's, and he's had very successful jobs in management. You know how he learned his social skills? The Xerox copier training manual for salespeople. I am not kidding. You know, I know a book that helped me. There was this book called The Power of Positive Thinking, you know, Dale Carnegie's stuff. Another good thing, I don't know if you have it over here, is Toastmasters. Toastmasters is a group where you learn how to give speeches. We have them in a lot of our cities. And then other people critique them, and that's a good thing. How about a speech therapist, a special education teacher, legal researcher, somebody that just works on the internet, looking up stuff for other people? I know one young man I've been talking to a lot on the phone, and he finally landed a legal research job. I said, and the other thing is, don't tell these people about all your problems. Just keep it professional. Talk about sports, pets, popular movies that are not controversial. And he said, well, what about church? And I said, this is a new church. Keep everything with these people professional. You don't tell them all about your background and everything. Just go in there, sell your work, and do the very best legal research that you can do, or other kind of research for an environmental organization. Just be good at what you do. Sell your work. And then he'd write up reports, and I said, you better print those out in hard copy, and you better have them on a hard drive at home, because that's your portfolio. So if you lose that job, then you've got those reports to show somebody else. Always keep copies of your work, and don't just keep them on a memory stick. Gets near a magnet or something, it's going to get erased. No, that stuff, that valuable, you better have it in hard copy, and you better have it at home. You know, my portfolio, boy, that comes first. Working memory is just terrible. Cannot remember more than just a few steps. And how about some of the people on the more severe end of the spectrum? We got to start thinking about jobs. Now, I think the situation here, from a medication standpoint, is better than it is at home. You're not giving out all these antipsychotic drugs to 5-year-olds and just throwing prescriptions at everything quite so crazy. You know, special diets, they've helped some kids. Fish oil supplements are starting to get some good science, being really good for the brain. And another thing is exercise. Tons and tons of exercise. You want evidence-based medicine? There's evidence-based medicine on exercise being good for the brain. I think we're going to end it here, so we'll have enough time for questions.